Okay, so let's talk a little bit about area preparation. This is what I call a bug out spot. Okay, it's in somewhat proximity to where there's food supplies and stuff like that stored. But this is a bug out spot that we're going to be setting up as a it's a permaculture forest thing. I'm not the expert on that. Some of the other guys are going to be handling a lot of that, but we'll talk a little bit about habitability and forestry management for a minute. And why it's relevant to survival retreat type spots. Okay, now this happens to be all private property, but it borders BLM land, and other people without maybe the same resource can take a look at situations like this on public land, which is actually taxpayer owned, and you should have a a right to utilize that land. I mean, the early American settlers obviously exercised the right to use public land. It was a situation where the government owned it, and then it was meant to be distributed to the people, not the government collects it from the people and then owns it in perpetuity. So when you look at prepping an area for shit hit the fan type settlement, you want it to be able to sustain life. And while the unimproved land doesn't really sustain that much life per acre, it's not particularly efficient. It's natural, but it's not particularly efficient. And so you have to look at things like roads and trails. Like here, this is pretty much the impassable point with at least the way the tires are on my truck. You know, there's some tractor type stuff that can get up here, but it's going to tear up the road, so pretty much just going in on foot. But the other big danger, at least in the American West, is this sagebrush. Okay, it helps fix nitrogen in the soil. There's all sorts of good, happy horse shit environmental reasons to have it around. However, this stuff is highly flammable, and that's what makes any kind of settlement in an area like this particularly dangerous, because an enemy can burn you out. And if you just go with straight up grass planting, now this is natural seasonal grass, but if you go with just straight up grass planting, what happens is that somebody observing it from a distance is going to say, oh, that's a settled area, let's go ground level and take a look. Now, there's a couple of ways we deal with that, which is we look at the natural placement of the trees and rocks and other stuff like that, but we also want to make this area more fire resistant. How do you do that? Well, you remove the underbrush in fire break zones, which means that in wildland firefighting, it's really hard to put the fires out. You pretty much can't. But what you can do is control to some degree where the fires go and where they don't go. So like right here, if this water continues flowing, it could make a fire break, although it tends to be a seasonal dry up. The road would act as a fire break, where if we clear some of the crap out of here, then a fire is less likely to be able to cross the road. We really want to save these trees for a whole lot of reasons. You know, they fix nitrogen in soil, they make it more fertile, they help keep the water from evaporating off as quickly in what little rain we get, and they provide shade and cover and a lot of other good things. But when fire spreads, it spreads in this shit down here, you know, this collection of pine needles and leaves that builds up over the years. Forestry management people call that duff, and it can actually be several feet deep, but usually a foot to 18 inches is about the max, and a lot of times it'll only be 6 or 8 inches deep, especially if you've got grass growing through it, and then it becomes a little bit more like a moss or a sod. And then this is part of the process of it turning to soil, which we spotted is that darkness is wet, but the thing is, the way it goes dark and the way it does that tells me that it's good fertile soil. This is good for gardening. But we want to save all these shaded areas, which means clearing all the brush from under the trees in such a way that they actually look the same from the air. And it's doable, because what happens is the other stage of it is to clear the lower branches off the trees. Okay, so that means using some loppers and clippers, and then eventually pole saw, maybe a climber with a chainsaw, but you really want to avoid anything that has a high likelihood of injury. But it means real tools. It means real saws, I can do this with a battery operated Sawzall and get pretty good results. But the idea is to remove that underbrush and remove the lower branches of the trees, everything that hangs down to ground level, because that's where the fire spreads. And by getting all of the stuff, the green stuff of a tree, just in the upper 2/3, that's really where you want that tree growing, is the upper 2/3. We just want the trunk to be a trunk, and we want the upper 2/3 of that tree, especially any kind of pine tree. We just want the upper 2/3 growing, and all that lower dead stuff, like in that far tree out there, that one, to have real good maintenance on that tree, a climber's going to have to get on there and just take all the dead shit off. And you know, it's okay firewood material as long as you're not trying to, you know, have overnight logs. The other thing to look out for is part of this is an orchard that had not been maintained. I would say this has gone a good 20 years without any real maintenance. So they've got some fallen down trees here. This is part of a natural forest progression. What happens is the weaker trees will fall over on their own. The problem is that they can also spread disease to some of the healthier trees. So this never had a culling effect of somebody coming through and kind of picking which trees were going to continue growing, getting the underbrush out of that shit, and getting these things to be healthy. Because these trees, if they grow big and tall next to each other and they're not kind of interfering with each other at the lower levels, it's kind of okay if they mix at the higher levels. I mean, that's kind of okay. The other reason to get rid of the lower branches is that lower branches are where ticks lay in wait for victims to come along, like me. And the ticks will lay in wait and then jump down on animals. They figured that part out, little blood-sucking bastards. They figured out that they can wait for a person or a deer or an animal to walk underneath the tree, and then they can just drop down and suck blood for the rest of their life, which they seem to really enjoy. And so that's the other reason for just getting all the lower crap out of these. Now, as far as any tactical advantages go to that, you're reducing some ground level tactical advantages, but you may be increasing others. So, you know, as a machine gunner in the Marine Corps, or 331, hoorah, we would, that was some of the work of preparing a defensive position to go out and clear brush. And naturally you have some visibility on target at a greater distance. And it's not that it provides cover, although it can do some cover. It can actually cause your rounds to tumble and lose a lot of accuracy getting through that shit. But obviously it's some concealment. It can be concealment for you and concealment for the enemy, but what you want is the enemy approaches to not have those concealed positions. So you cut the underbrush out of those, and then you can leave barriers of underbrush. And from my time in Army National Guard Combat Engineers, the other dirty little trick I learned about that stuff is that when you do leave brush barriers, you intertwine them with nasty barbed wire, concertina wire, stuff like that. Now, the thing is here, I'm not going to bring the wire out because I don't want anyone to get the idea that this has been turned into a defensive position. And we're mainly just kind of looking at homesteading type activities. I don't want somebody's kids or pets going and getting caught in concertina wire. But as far as having a brush barrier in certain areas, we're probably going to do something like that just to keep the deer out of the gardens, and then have it all still look quasi-natural. So that's our little lesson on survival, area preparation, forestry management. Most of these trees are going to live. Most of them are still going to be here. But this area is going to get all cleaned up. You'll be seeing progress as the months go by, since this is one of the spots that we're prepping. And it's area preparation, which you want to do at your leisure, not in panic mode, for sure. Anyway, more later.